I'm going to be talking about, very briefly, a kind of big picture, looking at some of the purposes, the evidence, the hopes, the possibilities, some of the easy and difficult questions, obviously very briefly. And I'll be doing more of this tomorrow in the workshop for anyone who comes. But I'm also interested in making this blue sky kind of stuff actually happen in the real world of kids and schools. And that, I think, your last question about how do you make it sexy, how do you make it real, is very important. And how do you make it appeal to people who are not the natural constituency for this? So I will be saying something about that. And I'll be illustrating it with very tiny little bits of mindfulness experience, because it's been a long day and I think we need a tiny bit of practice. So I'll be using a few of the practices that come from, it's called the .B program. I'll explain what .B means at the end, so that'll keep you in the room and not toddling off to the bar. If you want to know what .B means, it's the Mindfulness in Schools program's kind of brand or logo. Okay. Now, I think we're looking at a lot of lovely blue sky stuff, and I guess that's what we're wanting to get to here. The idea that one day mindfulness actually might be the kind of missing key for education, in the same way that it's the missing key for so many of the issues we've looked at today. Pain, conflict, violence, nations, and so on. It could be playing the same role within education, or in this case, a school. I've called it climate and ethos as well as mindfulness, because what we do know is that it's the climate and the ethos of the school that makes the difference. And I think that's what we're hoping to get to. A situation where mindfulness isn't just the odd lesson for kids or even short introductory lessons, but actually permeates everything about a school and starts to be central to school leadership, staff well-being, that top left quadrant, the curriculum, thinking skills, sport, performance, all the things that schools are about. Around the softer area, which we must remember is already there in schools. There is a lot of work going on in schools already on social and emotional learning, well-being, behaviour improvement. We're not starting from nowhere, but I think mindfulness is the missing key that makes all this stuff that is often rather cerebral and intellectual actually work. And of course we need it for targeted groups, special needs, counselling, pupil support, and so on. So it would be lovely to think one day that mindfulness was the missing key. The big question really is, how do we get there? I think we've got a fairly clear view. And I'll just illustrate, I think, where we're starting from, which you might see as a fairly low base. This is what happened at the beginning of a lesson, which one of the two writers of the .B Mindfulness in Schools programme had set up in his classroom. No kids are there yet. It's a chilly day, which is why they're wearing scarves, and kids are starting to arrive. And he's got this wonderful programme he's going to introduce them to, which is going to help them flourish and to learn how to be mindful in many different ways. And he's put a camera at the back, which he's mentioned to them, but they've forgotten about. So this is lesson 1, minute 1, as the kids are starting to arrive, and I hope it works. You won't hear the sound very well, but you really don't need to. It'll give you an idea of what kids are like, really. Oh, no, don't do this to me, no. Smile and breathe again. Okay. Thank you, Thich Nhat Hanh. I couldn't survive without you today. Okay. Richard's a very patient man. Anyway, we'll hold that there a moment, I think. What this reminds us of, I think, is that kids are kids. And they don't turn up in your classroom and say, teach me mindfulness that I may flourish. They go, what's this? So it sounds boring. Is it more this citizenship, which is what my son calls citizenship, I'm afraid. I've got a daughter who says, I say, what are you doing today at school? She says, self and society. they're not naturally turned on by these kind of things. And add to that the idea that you're going to sit on your bottom and meditate or shut your eyes and be silent, and it really doesn't go down very well. So we need to find ways to appeal to lads like this, to kids across the world, really. How are we going to make this fun? And I'm just going to share one of the first little practices that we do in lesson 1, week 1, with exactly those kids. And I'll share it with you because you need a bit of a change anyway. Before you stand up, which I'm going to invite you to do in a moment, I'd just like to ask you, where is your mind right now? Would you like to point to where your mind is? Anybody care to? Your mind's on me, thank you. That her over there, right? Global. Okay, anybody else? Anybody like to shout out where their mind is right now? In my iPhone. In your daughter's school? Right. Okay, now if you say to kids, point to where your mind is, they're a lot simpler than you lot. They're a much easier audience in many ways. They mostly just go like that. And you say, oh, right, so your mind's in your head. They go, yeah, my mind's, come on. Of course it is, next. So we do this little exercise, really, just to demonstrate to them that the mind may be more complicated than they think. So I wonder if you would kindly, quietly stand. Staying in your bubble, as we say at school. You don't have to do this standing, but you look like people who needed to stand to me. Now, in a moment, I'm going to invite you to clap your hands together when I count down from 3, 2, 1. I'm then going to ask you to clap your hands 3 times in the same rhythm, and then to hold out your hands in front of you, shutting your eyes or making your gaze a soft one, if you would. So, 3, 2, 1. Now, hands in front of you, about the same width as a football. And just resting your mind in your hands. Getting in touch with whatever sensations are there. Perhaps there's fizzing, pins and needles. Still a sense of smarting. Just being with that feeling for a moment. And now, class, and I'd like you to behave like children at this point, not smart-ass adults. Where is your mind right now, would you say? In your hands. Okay, do please sit down again if you would. Now, we may, of course, have children in our classes who know a lot about mindfulness. My friend Willem Koiken, who's a top professor in mindfulness in the UK, tells a lovely story that his daughter says to him, "Mindfulness is for losers, Dad." And he told that story at a conference recently, and then when he went home, he told this story. Should I want to make one thing clear? And he thought she was going to say, "I don't really think that." He said, "It's not just me that thinks that, Dad." But barring the smart-ass children of professors and so on, most kids find that actually quite an eye-opener, that exercise. They have never thought that their mind is anywhere than their head. And realizing that they can put it into their hands gets them thinking quite early on. Some of them find that quite spooky, realizing that you can move your mind around your body. And the reason, of course, we do the clapping is just to try to make the sensation more vivid. It's a more vivid way to do a tiny body scan than we might have done otherwise. But that's just an example, I think, of a terribly simple little exercise that helps kids to just get what you're talking about when you're talking about the attention. Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry if it didn't really work for you guys, but you're just too clever, really. Okay. Now, I'm just going to say a little bit about what's happening across the world in terms of mindfulness. Because there is a lot happening, in fact. The Garrison Institute in the United States have got a very nice database of programs, and there's 37 on there last time I looked. It may be larger now. Most of them come from the United States, but there's one from the UK, the Mindfulness in Schools program, .b, and one global one, which is Thich Nhat Hanh's initiative, and I'm sure the Mind and Life one will be on there as soon as it's there. So there are already programs. They don't try and evaluate them, they're just listing them, but it's interesting to see that there are 37 definable programs. We know that contemplatives such as the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh have both of them got a sort of global reach approach on this. They're setting out to develop work in schools and in education, focusing particularly on compassion and ethics in both cases, not surprising. There are plenty of things going on elsewhere in Europe and Australia, but we don't know what most of it is. We see odd papers pop up in the journals, but there's not very much information because there isn't a database of these things, but things are happening across the world. And of course, in Eastern countries, there are mindfulness programs developing which are more spiritually based. So there is stuff happening. We don't have to reinvent wheels entirely, but we are a long way from knowing really what works. And there's a kind of bag of things, really, which have all kinds of titles. The one that's most popular at the moment is contemplative education, but that can include, if you look at what's on the Garrison website, a whole range of things: meditation, mindfulness, mind and heart, yoga, tai chi, all kinds of things are there. And I think an interesting question is where we're setting the boundaries and what we're talking about and how we talk to each other about these kind of things. So there's a lot of it about, as they say. And there's some research emerging too, but I think we have to be clear that this research is very young. It's growing and it's promising, but it is small. If we were looking at that exponential curve of work on adults, the work on young people would be very much still at the very early stages. We're talking about a few schools, a few countries, relatively a few programs. It's promising, but we must be careful not to claim too much for it. There's 24 published studies at the moment that any of us have managed to find, and 5 overall reviews. There's one out there I saw by Michael John. I've done 2 recently for various publications. So there are people trying to review this. But it's very clear that these things are what the boring statisticians call methodologically weak. Small numbers, not very many controls, and absolutely no standardized measures of what we're talking about at all. And what's being looked at is a real mixed bag of things. You've got universal things for everyone, you've got targeted things, you've got things for young kids, old kids, all kinds of conditions, all kinds of measures. So you can't say it adds up to anything very solid yet. But the good news is, insofar as there are outcomes, and they are emerging, they're very similar to the work on adults. The kind of benefits that mindfulness is bringing to things like pain, illness, depression, anxiety, stress, sleep, eating, a whole range of things are incredibly similar to what's happening with adults. So it may be that children's minds are not dissimilar to ours. I mean, hard to believe, I know if you're a parent, but this would appear to be the case, at least when they're filling in self-report forms. It's a shame I can't find yet any examples of mind imaging, these lovely things we can put up, with red and green, and how the cerebral cortex this and the amygdala that, that's very convincing for head teachers and things. I haven't found any yet of young people. If anyone else has, it would be good, because I think that is actually, I'm being facetious because I'm English and we are facetious, but it's actually very powerful stuff, really. But it would be nice if there was more going on. Now, we've just done a study at Exeter, where I work, with the University of Cambridge and the University of Oxford. It was actually 520 kids, which we divided into a control group and an experimental group. And the findings of our study, which I'll share with you briefly, are very similar to the findings of other studies. So this is a kind of good example of what's happening. Now, it was of the Mindfulness in Schools programme, so I'll tell you a little bit about this programme, and if you come to the workshop tomorrow, you'll hear more about it. The Mindfulness in Schools programme started life as an 8-session course. It was designed to be very much a basic introduction to mindfulness and to fit into an ordinary class timetable for ordinary kids. And it started life being in a version for teenagers. There's now a version for adults because it was so popular with the teachers who ran it that they liked it for themselves. And there's a version developing for younger children, and there's a version developing for special needs kids with all kinds of conditions. But what the writers of it, who were 2 practicing school teachers, did was, as they would put it, take the DNA of the 8-week course, MBSR, MBCT, and turn it into something that was exciting, sexy, fun for teenagers to do. And it starts with an introduction, which does the whole science bit. It's got the brain imaging, it's got the hand clapping, it's got the how your mind will shape up, and very much tries to sell it to kids as a practical, useful, interesting tool. Tries to make it a bit edgy too. One of the practices we do is called Fofbok, which means feet on floor, bum on chair. And the kids like using the word bum, particularly in a classroom. And using these kind of acronyms sort of helps it to be a little less po-faced. There's a lesson on the attention where they're invited to think about where their attention is, and there's visual aids like flashing a torch around the room to see how your attention can wander or be focused. And they're invited to think about training the attention as being like training puppies. And some people actually bring puppies into the classroom. The theory being that the attention wanders, it makes messes, it brings you things you didn't ask for, just like a puppy. But that you train it with kindness and firmness and patience, not by shouting at it. And kids love this image, and it goes down pretty well. So that's a lesson on the attention. I won't go through each lesson because it'd take too long, but there's one about getting control of your feelings, turning towards calm, recognizing worry. That's a ruminating cow, if you wondered. Getting kids to notice what they worry about and the stories that we tell ourselves. Lovely lesson on being here now, in which kids taste various things and savour them. It starts with chocolate, and then it moves on to chilli, which is fun. Quite hot chilli goes down very well, with some kids going, "Oh, I'm not having that, I'm getting my mum down," and other kids saying, "Yeah, bring it on," and so on. But it's helping kids to notice their patterns and how they respond. And if you have time, you give them something boring like crackers, and they focus on what it is to be bored and what's the difference between chocolate and crackers and so on. Moving mindfully is a nice lesson, which is partly inspired by some movie. We use movie clips quite a lot, and the kids do mindful walking. And I wish we had time to show you some of the clips of the kids doing this. All kinds of kids, all kinds of schools, by week 5 are taking this very seriously. There's some lovely, lovely work goes on. Stepping back is metacognition, inviting kids to notice their thoughts coming and going. There's metaphors of buses or clouds and so on, and helping kids who by this time in most schools are sitting down for 20 minutes or so and able to actually follow their thoughts for that kind of time. It's surprising how quickly they get it, actually. Lesson 7 is the most fun. It's called Befriending the Difficult. That's a picture of a tarantula, if you wondered what that's about. I showed it to my daughter, who said she wouldn't even consider that because she's spider phobic. But this does something very edgy, which will make you all think is completely unethical, which is to introduce a shock ball into the class. Now, a shock ball is a little toy that gives random electric shocks. And it's a lovely game you play with kids, where basically you pass it round and you have to say 1, 2 before you pass it on again. Now, of course, the kids are allowed to turn their back if they don't want to be in it, but then they can think about what that feels like. Sometimes, if you've got a very litigious set of parents, you don't turn the thing on, and you go, "Oh, I'm sorry it wasn't on." All the kids go, "Oh," at the end. But it is a lovely way of getting them to recognise their stress signature and to become aware of their heart racing and their anxiety and so on. So I don't know whether this would go down well in American schools. You'd probably get sued if you did it there. But it's fun. And if you don't want to use shock ball, there's easier ways of doing it. But none of them are as much fun as the actual shock ball. I've run this lesson many times, and I'm still terrified before it, because I hate the damn thing. Anyway. And then there's a nice lesson at the end, pulling it all together. I won't go on anymore. I could be very enthused about it, but it's a lovely set of lessons. What the kids actually remember, of course, is all kinds of things. They remember the little practices. They remember Fofbok. They remember the one we'll do at the end if we've time, called .b. They remember a practice where you breathe in for the count of 7 and then out for 11. And they find these very useful at times of stress and trouble. They use them when in all kinds of circumstances. .b is basically stop and breathe. It's a simple 1-minute breathing space, is what it means. And there's a lovely story of a kid who received one of these on his phone. When you teach kids .b, one of their homeworks is to send it to each other as a text for homework. So they pick someone else in the class and send them a .b once a day. What actually happens, of course, is they're sending them all the time. But they soon get in the habit of just sending these out. And the rule is when you get one, you stop and breathe. And there's a lovely story of a kid who was in a club, and he came out, and his girlfriend had drunk too much and was passed out in the street. This is a lad of 17 or so. And he didn't know what to do. He was panicking. And then he got a .b. And he thought, I haven't got time for that. I can't stop and ruddy breathe now, you know. And he didn't know what to do, but he thought, well, I'll do it. So he stood there and breathed out 3 times as instructed. And he said at this point his mind cleared and he thought, I know the recovery position. So he turned the girl into the recovery position and he called the emergency services and they took her to hospital. She was very ill. But he was so grateful that actually he remembered to do the dot B and that the phone vibrated at just the right time. So that was it was a good example. But some of the other things, they remember the chocolate, they remember the chili, they love that lesson. They call it the lesson with the shock ball. They don't call it, you know, becoming aware of our strength signature or, you know. They say, have you done the lesson with a shock ball yet? Because when you start teaching this stuff in a school, the word goes round pretty quickly that this is edgy stuff. And what's great about this curriculum is it is edgy. It's a bit, you know, it is different. You kind of shut the doors and say, you know, not all the staff may approve of this. You know, you kind of build it up a bit, make it fun. They like the fact that they've got an MP3 file for meditation to help them sleep. I know it's, you know, heretical to talk about relaxation and meditation, but they have these, and a lot of kids who have real sleeping problems. Kids are very tired, basically. So many of them go to sleep in class when you teach them body scan. They love meditation. And we use film clips. I was going to show you Kung Fu Panda, but I couldn't stop it crashing my program, so if you come tomorrow, I'll try and make him work. But it's a lovely little clip from a Disney film, and so on. So what did we find? Well, we found that on the posh sounding word acceptability, that this program was very acceptable. They enjoyed it, they said they learnt a lot, and really cheering, 80% of them said they actually used the practices in some way 3 months later. Often quite small, you know, a small breathing exercise, something would come in. Some of them practiced hard and were using it a lot, but 80% of them were doing something about mindful movement, eating, remembering to eat more slowly, doing a little bit of mindful walking, and they particularly used it when they were stressed or anxious. And given it's only 8 sessions and the goal of it was simply really to raise awareness, we thought this was pretty good. And in terms of actual mental health outcomes, again, you know, doing the statistical stuff, there was fewer depressive symptoms at post-treatment, which was straight away, and follow-up, which was 3 months later. So that was very cheering. Lower stress at follow-up, and greater well-being too. We use self-report measures for this only, but nevertheless there was clear improvements in well-being. And very clearly the amount of home practice kids did was associated strongly with their well-being and less stress at follow-up. And the reason there's a picture of the kids working there is because follow-up time was exam time. And many of these were kids who were taking their big public exams. And many of them said how helpful it was to have done that, and they were still using it 3 months later. So that was quite cheering, and has caused quite a big splash in the media in Britain. I've been on the telly and the radio, as have many of my colleagues, talking about this, and it was in about 10 of our major newspapers. So it's been quite a major study, and we're now applying for funding to do a major randomised control trial, because this wasn't randomised. What I would say about this study, it was done for nothing. Everybody who did it just did it for nothing. I put my time in, Professor Koiken put his time in, all the schools did it for nothing. We just thought, let's get this done. And there was bits of money Willem had in odd pockets at the university, but nothing major, just for, you know, photocopying and so on. So we thought, well, let's just do it. And I think that's where mindfulness is just so strong. I mean, how many universities bother to do things for nothing anymore? But mindfulness has got that feel about it. Now, this is some of the things the kids said about it too. We obviously did the qualitative work because we're very keen to join together the qualitative work. I love that one. I so identify with that top one. It helped me doing all the stupid stuff I do. If you ask me what mindfulness has done, I think that's what it's done for me, really. And this one was particularly nice too. There's always one, isn't there? Always one. But we did collect a lot of qualitative data, and I think it's really very important to knit together the qualitative and the quantitative, so that was very gratifying. Okay, getting now to back to the sort of blue sky stuff. Where is mindfulness in schools actually fitting, either easily at the moment or imminently? Well, it's fitting pretty well into social and emotional learning, and there are many schools with quite major programs on that. And the organisation in the United States, CASEL, is very key, who are responsible for social and emotional learning networking across the United States, are very much in the forefront of joining together mindfulness and social and emotional learning. So there is a good bedrock there to build on. Obviously, it appeals to schools who are interested in mental health and well-being of kids and staff, of course. It fits very well with schools that take their special needs stuff seriously. Obviously, ADHD, anger, anxiety, it's very powerful for working with special needs kids. And some schools are using it with the older kids for exam preparation. Very helpful there to get kids to feel less stressed and so on. Some schools are working on thinking skills and brain-based learning, and I've started working with a network of thinking schools in the United Kingdom who tend to come at this stuff from a very cognitive level, but nevertheless it's an interesting way open to get them to think about a much more holistic approach to thinking, and a lot of interest in brain-based learning right across education, so there's plenty that we can build on. And where it would be nice if it were to go next, and I think this is the next stage, is to start to build it into school, more mainstream school subjects, because that's where it starts to really be part of the fabric, really. And obviously staff development. I mean, clearly, ideally, you don't do any of this till you've got all your staff thoroughly mindful. In the real world, that's not always how it works, and sometimes you have to let the curriculum lead the school. But it would be ideal when it's there for staff, because they really matter. And parenting courses, they're starting some suggestions that courses on mindful parenting, which are being run in some local authorities in the UK, for example, are linking up with mindfulness in schools, which is interesting. And I've just been invited to go and work with adoptive parents, which appeals to me because I am an adoptive parent, so I know how tough it is, on mindfulness for adoptive parents and linking this up with work around attachment and trauma and so on. So exciting stuff. And you can see that it would fit so easily, and does fit so easily, into all those kind of existing frameworks. But there are some challenges around, and this is sort of getting towards my final slides, really. What are the issues and problems? Well, obviously, I would say this, wouldn't I, as Professor, research and evaluation, we need more of it. We need to make sure that whatever people are doing, they put effort into evaluation. And better, and by better I don't just mean randomised controlled trials. I know that's what the funders all want, but I think you do need randomised controlled trials, and you also need to link it with qualitative work, phenomenology, and so on. We need to find ways to sell it, as we said, and most of all encourage practice. What often happens on these courses for adults and kids is they love it at the time, but sustaining that practice is the challenge, and I think that's what we need to do. I think we've got to face the fact that mindfulness has got a pretty tedious image in some people's minds. I've been making a list of them. I added nerdy this afternoon because that came out in one of the workshops. It can be all those things. I know we don't think it is, because we're the cutting edge people on the inside, but looked at from the outside, remember, mindfulness is for losers. How are we going to get that across to people? Because it gets in the way for kids who are not the standard kids who are a bit edgy, a bit difficult to reach. It gets in the way for some teachers who think that this is all rather spiritual or rather wholesome. .B was about to rename one of its new approach in schools, Healthy Minds. I said, oh, for God's sake, don't call it Healthy Minds. It sounds like what the Russians called everything 10 years ago. When I went to Russia 10 years ago and tried to help them stop being so indoctrinating. But it's so easy to flip into the language of well-being and wholesomeness, and it doesn't always go down, as anyone who's a parent knows. I think we need to think hard about what our goals are. There's so many possible goals for this, ranging from the quite easy sort of cognitive attention stuff, where's your mind, and so on, through learning, well-being, compassion, very important, to Arthur's interest in ways of knowing, actually fundamentally shifting what we mean by understanding reality and so on. There's so many goals. I think, personally, we start with the easy ones. I don't think you whip straight into, what is real for kids. I think you start with simple things like how helpful this is for stress and anxiety, how it helps them to learn and so on. And you sell it to teachers on things like learning and calmer behaviour and so on. But I always think of these things as a kind of Trojan mole, to mix my metaphors, it's like a Trojan horse and you get it in anyway, and then you kind of mole your way in. So let's get mindfulness into schools any way we can, really. I think there's there's a tension between authenticity. You know, we are mindful people. People must have all done the 8-week course. They must have trained for 3 years. They must practice 3 hours a day and go on silent retreats before they're allowed to pick up the .B curriculum and teach kids to, you know, feel their feet and sit their bums on a chair. There's that one. Or there's the, well, you don't need any training at all. Just go and buy Goldie Hawn's books. You know, you can send for them on Amazon. You know, it says here, kids, that you're supposed to do this. And when they ask the difficult questions, you've no idea what they're asking about because you've never done any mindfulness yourself at all. It's a difficult one. How precious are we about mindfulness, or how kind of, well, let many flowers bloom, stick it on the internet, stick it online? I think, as you were saying earlier, you can't stop this happening. You just have to make sure that what you're offering has got that solidity. But I think if you're going to run a simple introductory course on mindfulness in schools, you're going to have to get staff up to speed pretty fast because they haven't got the money to train for 2 years to become mindfulness practitioners. So I think it's a difficult one, and it's engaging people a lot. There's a lot to learn from parallel areas like social and emotional learning on what's worked already, and we don't have to reinvent wheels, and there's been reviews on that, and I've been engaged in quite a lot of them. We know a lot already. And this is the final one, or the second to final one anyway. I think we've got to be honest about some of the pressures those of us who are developing this are under. You know, there are egos, there are self-interests, and there are pressures. You know, I'm doing my mindfulness course here, but I want to make it mine and to patent it and to sell this one, and I don't want you doing on that course because this one's better. And this is my randomised control trial, and I'm not sharing my measures with you because I'm a university and, you know, I'm like that with it. We're all under those pressures, and we're all only human. So I think ourselves learning to really work together and share for the common good is challenging. As you were talking about, it's a challenging business, really, trying to make that work. And finally, final thought is to really take it steady. I think one can get almost too enthused about this and try and shove it on people before they're ready. I spent many years developing a major program in the United Kingdom called Social and Emotional Learning. SEAL it was called, and I learnt to fear some of the teachers who really took it on most enthusiastically. But I would go into schools to see how it was going, and I was met by this rather wild-eyed person, typically. They were usually about 25 and in a little black suit and terribly and horribly thin. And they'd come up to me and say, hi, and shake my hand like this and say, it's great you've come. I'm driving SEAL through the staff, they'd say. And they made this sort of rather rude gesture, though they didn't think of it that way, with their right hand and said, I'm driving it through. And you'd say, oh, right, good. And you'd go around the school, we are a SEAL school, we are this, we are that. And then you'd meet the staff and you'd say, how's it going? And they'd all look tired. And say, well, it'll be lovely when she gets her deputy headship and goes away, we can all do something else, can't we? So I think we've got to be careful that we don't push this too quickly. You know, it is tempting to sort of say everybody needs this tomorrow, but it's got to be done well and it's got to be done effectively. I won't do this. I would have done a little practice with you, but I will tell you a little more about what D.B is, but I know we need a bit of time for plenary. So were we doing a .B, this is what you would be enjoying, which is to stop and to recognise where you are. So you would be getting kids to whatever they're doing, you know, the phone goes, or you do the bell or whatever, and you just invite them to simply, wherever they are, stop. They don't have to be sitting specially, they don't have to be, you know, getting in your mindful position, sitting up straight with your feet on the floor. Just stop. And take stock of where you are right now. I'm relieved to have made it through and very glad I got rid of the mindfulness of the Kung Fu Panda thing, for example, because I didn't have any mess-ups. So that's where I am. I'm feeling a sense of relief. So where are you? Where's your body? Where's your mind? And so on. And just for a few breaths, just to breathe with that. And finally, and that's the cleverness of B, I suppose, stop, recognise, breathe, and be. And I think we need to do that ourselves with mindfulness in schools. Where are we up to? Enjoy where we are, not try and push it too quickly, work together effectively, find ways to appeal to kids, teachers, parents, and so on, that locate with who they are, and not let our kind of missionary zeal cause us to drive it through, and then they'll all be pleased when we go away. Okay, oh, this is rather lovely, actually. Final thought. We've just published, as I say, lots of newspaper articles came out about our randomised control trial, and this was one of the comments in a terrible paper called the Daily Mail, which was wonderful. This geezer had either read it or hadn't bothered to read it. It was all about, influences depression. He said, show me a person who can teach young people to meditate and I will make him Minister of Education. To which I just have to say, thank you.